Lake Pontchartrain, Louisiana, summer 2019. I always thought betrayal was just a word people threw around, until the moment I felt the water swallow me cold and choking, and saw my brother-in-law's smirk floating above it like oil on glass. The boat engine sputtered. Gulls cried overhead. The sun stabbed my eyes as I surfaced, coughing lake water burning my throat. And there he was, Gavin standing at the stern, not rushing to help, not even pretending, just watching. Like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. It had started like any other Louisiana summer morning, thick air, humming insects, and that heavy stillness that settles over Pontchartrain before noon. Gavin had called 2 nights earlier. "Winston, we haven't gone fishing in months. Just us. Come on, brother." I'd hesitated. Tension had been simmering between us ever since Mom passed and the estate talks began. But I agreed. I've faced worse storms than awkward family mornings. We set out from the marina at 7:45 a.m. sharp. Old habits die hard. After 20 years as a Navy SEAL, punctuality sticks whether you want it to or not. Theo, the dockhand, joked about you old-timers beating the breakfast rush. Gavin laughed too loud. At the time, I didn't think twice. Later, I'd replay that laugh like a tape. From the moment we left shore, something was off. Gavin kept checking his phone between casts, fingers twitching, pupils wide. A torn bedding slip peeked from his shirt pocket when he bent to grab the cooler. My instincts kicked in automatically: scan, assess, categorize. Jittery behavior, shallow breathing, panic brewing just beneath the surface. Around 9:30 a.m., we anchored in a quiet cove half a mile off the southern shore. The lake shimmered like polished glass. As I baited my line, Gavin said casually, "You ever think about what happens to the lake house?" You... The words hung in the humid air. I looked at him. "I sub 51, Gav. Not planning on disappearing anytime soon." He chuckled, but his eyes didn't scent. "Yeah, but life sends unpredictable. Accidents, storms, heart attacks. Carla and I were just saying, maybe it sent makes sense if we handled things when the time comes." Carla, my sister. He used her name like a crowbar. I kept my voice neutral. The will sips clear, 50-50. Mom was thorough. For a fraction of a second, irritation flashed across his face. Quick but real, and right then, something in me locked on. I turned back toward the water. That's when I felt it, a sudden shove between my shoulder blades. Hard, precise. My hands slipped off the railing. The world spun. I hit the water flat, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. I surfaced choking, expecting him to circle back. Instead, the engine coughed twice and died. Clean cut. The kill switch. It wasn't an accident. I've handled engines in storms overseas. I know the difference between failure and sabotage. And then I saw him. He wasn't scrambling. He wasn't even moving. Gavin just stood there staring down at me, smiling. A stray buoy drifted and thumped against my chest. The hollow sound echoed through my ribs. My SEAL training took over: slow breaths, steady kicks, scanned for exits. Shoreline visible, distance half a mile, reachable, but survival wasn't my only thought. Intent was... He'd waited until I turned my back. That push had timing, purpose, and confidence. This was no clumsy accident. I swam to the stern and climbed up the ladder. Gavin snapped out of his trance, suddenly flailing for his performance. "Jesus, Winston! God, you scared me, man. You went over so fast. I thought you were... I thought..." He grabbed my shoulder like a guilty actor overselling the scene. His eyes were too wide. His voice cracked on the last word: amateur hour. I didn't respond. I scanned the console. The lanyard for the kill switch hung neatly by the throttle, unclipped clean. I let my silence do the work. He filled it with nervous chatter. We fished another hour, both pretending, outwardly, calm. Inwardly, I was filing evidence: shove angle, kill switch, facial tells. My mind moved like it used to on recon, quiet, methodical, lethal impatience. When we docked around noon, the sun was punishing. As Gavin tied off the boat, I opened the glove box to grab my sunglasses. That's when I found it, a crumpled, damp receipt. Baton Rouge Marine Repairs, June 28th, 2019. Itemized engine tune-up. Kill switch replacement. Electrical rewiring. 11 days before the trip. I folded it carefully and slid it into my wallet. My thumb traced the underlined date, a single piece of paper, and the first stone in what would become a fortress. Walking toward the parking lot, Gavin clapped my back too hard. See? Just like old times, huh? His grin was stretched thin over something rotten. Desperation. He didn't know I'd seen the receipt. He didn't know that the shove, the smirk, and the silence had flipped a switch inside me. He should have left alone. I didn't confront him. Rage is loud and sloppy. Strategy is quiet and fatal, and I've always been patient. He thought the lake would swallow me. He had no idea who he set to pushed. New Orleans, Louisiana, fall 2019. The sound that haunted me most wasn't the splash of the lake. It was the click of the front door locking behind me that night, echoing through an empty house that used to feel safe. I'd returned from the marina still damp, with the receipt folded like a secret in my wallet. My clothes stuck to my skin, as if they carried the lake's accusation home with me. I moved through the house like someone entering a crime scene, slow, deliberate, taking in every familiar thing that suddenly felt altered. That's the thing about betrayal. It changes the light in every room. Grief came creeping in the days that followed. Not for myself, not even for the attempt on my life. It was for what Gavin's shove represented. The collapse of family trust that had outlasted deployments, hurricanes, even the death of my wife. Carla and I grew up under this roof. Now every photograph on the walls stared back at me like a witness that wouldn't speak. The nightmares came first. Cold water. Kill switches. Gavin's grin hovering above the surface. I'd wake before dawn, sitting at the kitchen table in silence, watching condensation slide down a forgotten glass of water like the ticking of a clock. Then came the doubt. Doubt is slower than fear. It seeps. It whispers. Maybe he didn't mean it. Maybe I slipped. Maybe... No. I'd replayed every second too many times. My mind, trained to assess ambushes and pitch-black foreign rivers, recognized precision when it felt it. Gavin's shove had intent written all over it. Carla noticed my distance by late September. We were sitting on the back porch one humid evening, the smell of wet grass clinging to the air. "You've been quiet lately," she said, swirling wine in her glass. I gave her half a smile. Just thinking. About the estate again, among other things. She sighed, tired. Gavin's Sepp's stressed too. This inheritance stuff is complicated. I studied her face carefully. She wasn't defending him. She was repeating him. That was worse. I wanted to tell her everything, but I didn't, not yet. I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof that couldn't be twisted or denied. And then on a Tuesday night in early October, I got the voicemail. I'd missed a call while jogging along the levee. By the time I got home, sweat cooling on my neck, there was a single new message. No caller ID. I pressed play. A man Sit's voice, muffled and hurried. "You weren't supposed to survive." Nothing else. Just that. The line went dead. The house was silent, except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. My skin prickled. I replayed it 3 times. Same voice, same words. I transferred it to an encrypted drive that same night. I didn't know who it was yet, but that message was the first confirmation that this wasn't paranoia. Someone expected me to die. I started noticing smaller cracks after that. Estate paperwork left deliberately misfiled in the study. Gavin's handwriting, sloppy, nervous, keys left in odd places. A document folder moved exactly 2 inches on my desk between Wednesday and Thursday. To anyone else, meaningless. To me, it was the language of intrusion. One afternoon, while sorting bills, I found a bank transfer stub stuck between junk mail. A $4,500 cash advance on Gavin Sepp's joint line of credit dated September 14th. The handwriting on the memo line read, "Due by 30th. Debt. Pressure. Deadline." The puzzle pieces were assembling themselves whether I wanted them to or not. Emotionally, I was fraying. Grief and betrayal are heavy things. They sit in the chest like wet sand. My wife Lillian had passed 5 years earlier, and the house had carried echoes of her laugh ever since. Now those echoes felt like they were warning me. I'd sit in her old reading chair at night, listening to the wind rattle the shutters and wondering how far Gavin was willing to go. There was one night, mid-October, when the wind came hard off the lake, rattling windows like loose teeth. I was in the living room, lights off, when I heard the front door creak open slowly. My hand went automatically to the small safe behind the bookshelf. Old instincts. I padded silently to the hallway. It was just the wind, forcing the latch, but standing there, heart steady but cold, I realized something. I didn't feel safe in my own house anymore. That was the breaking point. The doubt had done its job. It had forced me to see the situation clearly. Gavin wasn't just a manipulative brother-in-law with a gambling problem. He was a man under financial pressure, watching a $1.2 million estate slip out of his hands, and he'd already proven he was willing to push, literally, to change his odds. And me? I wasn't just his brother-in-law. I was the obstacle between him and survival, the target he'd failed to eliminate cleanly. By late October, my grief was calcifying into something harder to resolve. I started locking drawers, cataloging papers, photographing documents with timestamps. Every night I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, drawing timelines, connections, and questions. Who sent the voicemail? Who else knew? What was Gavin's next move? My strategy training had always been about patience. Doubt wasn't weakness anymore, it was fuel. As Halloween decorations went up around the neighborhood, my house turned into a quiet command post. I didn't announce it. I didn't confront. I observed. Gavin thought he'd shaken me. He had no idea I was settling in for a long game. Spring 2020, New Orleans, Louisiana. By March, the fog in my head had burned off. Doubt had done its work, now strategy took the wheel. I've always believed that revenge without discipline is just noise. Strategy, though, that's music. The first step was quiet. Legal ground. I wasn't going to throw wild punches. I was going to build a case Gavin couldn't wriggle out of, a structure so precise that every lie he told would become a brick in his own wall. I called Miss Rhodes. She wasn't just any lawyer. She'd handled my family's estate affairs for 15 years, sharp, unflappable, and as precise as a scalpel. I drove to her office on Magazine Street on a breezy Thursday morning, March 12th, 2020. The azaleas outside were just starting to bloom, their petals bright against the damp pavement. She welcomed me with that professional calm that says she already knows something's up. "Winston," she said, sliding her reading glasses up the bridge of her nose, "you don't usually make appointments without a reason." I handed her the envelope. Photocopies of the $2,800 Marine receipt, the $4,500 cash advance stub, and a typed transcript of the voicemail. She scanned them methodically, her pen tapping the desk. "This is serious," she said finally. "I know," I replied. "That sepso's why I sepsum here." She leaned back. "If what you scepter implying is correct, this isn't scepter, just civil. This could touch criminal law." "Exactly. I'm not ready to make it public yet. I need to collect, quietly." She nodded slowly, her lawyer Sip's mind already spinning. "Then we sepu do it cleanly. Paper trail first, financial irregularities, insurance adjustments, property filings. If Gavin Sip's planning anything, there sepu be breadcrumbs." Step 2 was intelligence. For that, I called Tom. Tom and I go way back. Afghanistan, 2003. He was a comms guy, smart and patient, and after retiring he'd opened a private investigations agency out in Metairie. If anyone knew how to gather evidence without lighting fireworks, it was him. We met at a diner off Veterans Boulevard. Neutral ground, greasy coffee, reliable silence. "You look like hell," Tom said, stirring sugar into his cup. "Family drama," I replied. He gave a dry laugh. "That sep's usually more dangerous than combat." I slid a manila folder across the table with the same contents I'd given Miss Rhodes. He read silently, his brows knitting tighter with each page. "When did you get the voicemail?" he asked. October. And he pushed you in July. Yep. He exhaled slowly. All right. You want surveillance? Legal. Public spaces only. No gray zone cowboy stuff. Tom smirked. You haven't set changed. Within a week, Tom had eyes on Gavin's movements. Legally, public spaces, casinos, bars, marina. Nothing intrusive, nothing reckless. On April 4th, Tom called me at 9:17 p.m. I remember because I was in my workshop cataloging receipts. Got something, he said. Harrisips. Gavin met a guy, mid-40s, shaved head, wearing a Saints jacket. They talked for 20 minutes near the poker tables. I got a clean shot of them shaking hands, time-stamped. Send it. The photo arrived seconds later. Gavin grinning like a man with a plan, clasping hands with someone who looked like debt collection dressed up as leisure. That was the moment I knew his financial desperation wasn't fading, it was evolving. Meanwhile, Ms. Rhodes uncovered a quiet bombshell. Insurance policy adjustments dated August 11, 2019. Barely a month after the push, Gavin had increased the life insurance on the estate structures, naming himself as secondary beneficiary after Carla, a $50,000 bump in coverage. The paper trail was starting to hum like a live wire. I decided to test Gavin lightly. One evening in late April, during a family dinner at Carla Sip's house, I mentioned, casually, funny thing, the lawyer said they separate auditing some of the estate insurance policies this summer. Gavin froze mid-bite. Not long, maybe a half second, but enough. His forehead glistened. He forced a laugh. Yeah, that's Sip's routine, right? Sure, I said, watching his hands. He rubbed his thumb over his knuckles, a nervous tell I'd seen in Afghanistan right before someone lied about coordinates. Carla noticed too. Her eyes flicked toward him, brief but sharp. She didn't say anything, but something in her shifted that night. May rolled in humid and heavy. The lake smelled like warm salt, and the city moved slower in the heat. My quiet plan was solidifying piece by piece. I started keeping a ledger, not digital, but handwritten in a black moleskine notebook locked in my safe. Every date, every receipt, every conversation got logged. Voicemails backed up, photos printed and sealed. I treated my brother-in-law's betrayal like an operation behind enemy lines. Tom Sip's updates came weekly. May 3rd, Gavin spotted at Harrah's again. Same associate. May 11th, recorded phone call in a public bar, Gavin discussing moving things before lawyers get in the way. May 24, surveillance shows Gavin visiting Baton Rouge Marine repairs again. Every entry tightened the noose. Miss Rhodes began discreet financial freezes, nothing dramatic, just legal footings, preliminary injunction filings to ensure Gavin couldn't transfer or liquidate estate assets without notification. She called it quiet weatherproofing. I called it strategy. The night I saw the casino photo printed on my desk beside the insurance papers, I realized something important. Gavin wasn't just reckless. He was building a house of cards with borrowed time. And I was stacking bricks right beside him. The closing beat came June 2nd, 2020. Tom met me again at the diner, dropping a fresh surveillance folder on the table. Inside, a clean transcript of Gavin's bar conversation about transferring titles before Winston gets wise, plus corroborating timestamps and witnesses, all legally obtained. I closed the folder slowly. This, Tom said, is starting to look like premeditation. I nodded. Exactly what I need. The quiet plan wasn't loud, but it was working. Piece by piece, Gavin's schemes were being documented, boxed, and prepared. He thought no one was watching. I was watching everything. Summer 2020, New Orleans, Louisiana. Deception has an echo. It doesn't disappear when the lie is told. It reverberates quietly, bouncing off conversations, glances, paperwork, until you start to hear the pattern underneath the noise. By July 2020, Gavin's echoes were loud enough for anyone paying attention. Luckily for me, I was listening. It started with paper, always paper. I'd mailed out a notarized letter in early July, a standard legal update drafted with Miss Rhodes. Nothing aggressive, Just a polite notice to all parties about forthcoming estate audits and insurance reviews in accordance with updated federal guidelines. It was pure legal theater, carefully worded to sound routine. But it wasn't the letter itself that mattered. It was the effect. Gavin received his copy on July 8th. By July 10th, Tom reported that Gavin had visited his bank twice, Harrah's once, and made a late-night stop at Baton Rouge Marine Repairs again. Panic has a rhythm. Gavin's was speeding up. Carla noticed it too, though she didn't yet understand what she was seeing. One sticky summer evening, we were sitting on her porch, fireflies pulsing in the dark. She poured sweet tea into mismatched glasses the way Mom used to. Gavin sis has been on edge, she said softly. Snapping at the kids, making late-night calls on the porch. He even forgot our anniversary dinner last week. That Sip's not him. I stayed quiet, letting her fill the silence. She sighed. It sets, like he sets, hiding something. She was finally starting to hear the echoes too. I decided to add subtle pressure. Not confrontation, just suggestion. During a small family BBQ on July 18th, I mentioned while flipping ribs, Miss Rhodes said if the insurance audits turn up inconsistencies, it could trigger automatic legal reviews. Paper trails have a way of surfacing. Gavin's spatula froze midair. His jaw tightened. He laughed it off too quickly. Yeah, well, good thing everything that's is clean then, huh? Carla looked at him then, not casually, but carefully. It was the first time I saw suspicion flicker behind her eyes. Later that evening, after everyone left, she lingered in the kitchen with me while the dishwasher hummed. Winston, she said slowly, what are you not telling me? I met her gaze. She wasn't accusing, she was afraid. For now, I said carefully, just pay attention. Don't confront him, just notice. She nodded, unsure but willing. That was the first real crack in the loyalty wall Gavin had relied on. Meanwhile, Tom Sip's surveillance was uncovering Gavin Sip's attempts to stay ahead of the tightening net. On July 22nd, he caught Gavin meeting the same Saints jacket guy in the Harrah Sip's parking garage. This time the audio was clear enough to pick up snippets. Needs to move fast. Before lawyers freeze it all. Winston Sips sniffing around. They didn't yet realize parking garages echo. The transcription went straight into the ledger. Dates, times, locations documented meticulously. August turned the city into a humid furnace. Hurricane season was stirring, and the air carried that electric weight before storms. I mirrored that weight in Gavin's life. Miss Rhodes filed quiet inquiries into property transfers and insurance updates, legally standard but strategically timed. The more legitimate scrutiny increased, the more Gavin's composure frayed. On August 11th, a date that had already burned itself into my mind because of the insurance bump the year before, I visited Carla unexpectedly in the afternoon. She was in the kitchen sorting mail, frowning at a thick envelope addressed to Gavin. What Sip's that? I asked casually. She handed it over. Some loan thing, I think. He said it said Dad's nothing. The return address, Jefferson Parish Finance Cooperative. I didn't open it, of course, but I memorized the sender, the postmark, and the weight of the envelope. Later, Tom confirmed Gavin had attempted to secure a secondary mortgage against a non-liquid portion of his inheritance share. The loan was denied. Desperation was starting to look like sweat stains on Gavin's calm facade. Carla's arc accelerated in late August. She confronted Gavin not with accusations, but with observations. I wasn't there, but she told me about it afterward. I just asked why he was making so many trips to Baton Rouge. She said, wringing her hands when we met at a cafe on St. Charles. He snapped, said I was spying on him. Then he spent the night at some motel. Winston, he Sep's unraveling. Her voice trembled, not just from fear, but from the pain of realizing the man she married was hiding something enormous. I placed a folder on the cafe table. Inside were printed photos, the Harrah's transcripts, and the notarized letter copy. She looked through them slowly, her eyes hardening with each page. This is real, she whispered. Yes, I said, and I need you to be very sure before we take this further. If you step onto this path, there sips no pretending you didn't know. She closed the folder carefully. I sent with you. That was the moment she crossed the moral Rubicon. She wasn't just my sister anymore, she became my ally. September arrived with heavy storms rolling through the Gulf. The marina creaked under wind gusts, and the estate paperwork was finally being reviewed by the insurance auditors. Everything was aligning exactly as planned. Gavin, meanwhile, tried a new tactic: negotiation. On September 14th, during a tense family dinner, he cornered me by the kitchen sink, while Carla wrangled the kids upstairs. "You know, Winston," he started, forced casual. "I have been thinking, maybe it makes sense for me to buy out your share of the estate. Simplify everything, you get your cash, I take the headache. Win-win." I turned slowly, drying my hands with deliberate calm. Interesting offer. Why the sudden generosity? He shrugged too casually. "Just seems easier for everyone." "Or for you," I said, my tone flat. His eyes hardened for a fraction of a second before the charm slid back on. "Just think about it." But I'd already thought about it, and I knew exactly why he was making that move. The legal pressure, the audits, the surveillance, they were cornering him. Buying me out was his last desperate lever to control the estate before everything he'd tried to bury came up for air. I didn't need to answer that night. His offer wasn't a proposal. It was a confession dressed in a suit. 2021, New Orleans, Louisiana. Some battles are won in moments. Others are won in silence, over months, while the other side doesn't even realize the tide has turned. 2021 was my year of the slow burn. The plan I'd built in 2020 wasn't just documentation, it was infrastructure. And by January, that infrastructure started quietly tightening around Gavin like a dock rope during high tide. The first significant move happened January 14th, 2021. Miss Rhodes filed a preliminary injunction with the parish court. The filing wasn't aggressive. It was precise. It requested that all major estate assets, including the lakehouse, adjoining property parcels, and insurance-linked trusts, be temporarily frozen from transfer pending audit and review. The injunction went through without much noise. Gavin wasn't even notified until January 22nd by certified mail. By then, the freeze was already active. The moment he received that letter, Tom reported a sudden spike in Gavin's movements, multiple calls to his bank, an unplanned trip to Baton Rouge, and 2 separate visits to Harrah's within 48 hours. Pressure was doing its work. Meanwhile, I kept my routine as ordinary as possible. I went fishing alone on weekday mornings. Just like before, I repaired parts of the house. I had quiet dinners with Carla and the kids. To Gavin, it looked like I was calm, distracted, maybe even complacent. But behind that calm, the legal gears were grinding. By February, the insurance underwriters had opened formal reviews into the policy increases Gavin had pushed through in 2019. Miss Rhodes ensured that the auditors received every relevant document, including the original $2,800 boat maintenance receipt and evidence of Gavin's gambling debts. Quietly, no announcements. Tom's surveillance shifted focus during this time. Instead of casinos and shady parking garages, he started monitoring Gavin's administrative behavior, noting how he interacted with legal institutions. It turned out to be a goldmine. On February 19th, Gavin attempted to initiate a $50,000 transfer from a joint inheritance account to a private LLC he'd hastily created under a friend's name. The bank flagged it automatically because of the injunction. The transfer was blocked. Tom caught the aftermath. Gavin pacing in the Harrah's garage on the phone, cursing loudly. The audio was crystal clear. "They froze everything. No, I don't care. Just find a way." That recording went straight into the ledger. March brought the first cracks in his mask during family interactions. At a Sunday dinner on March 7th, Gavin arrived late, smelling faintly of whiskey, and barely touched his food. He tried to keep his usual charm, but it kept slipping. Carla and I exchanged a single glance across the table. She saw it too. That night, she texted me. Carla. He sips unraveling. I can feel it. Me, good. Let him." In April, Miss Rhodes filed quiet supplementary motions to strengthen the injunction, citing attempted asset transfers and potential bad faith maneuvering. Gavin received notice on April 14th. By April 15th, Tom recorded him at the marina, slamming his truck door and muttering, "He's setting me up. He's setting me up." "No, Gavin, You were setting yourself up. I was just keeping the receipts. The emotional weight of that year was different from 2019's shock and 2020's strategy. This was endurance. Every move I made was measured in weeks, not minutes. Every document filed had ripple effects that took time to unfold. It required patience, the kind I'd honed in night operations overseas, waiting in silence for the right moment. Summer came, thick and humid. The lake buzzed with tourists again, unaware of the quiet legal storm building underneath the surface. Gavin, meanwhile, began to lock himself into paranoia. He changed the locks on the shared boathouse without notifying me in June, a direct violation of estate agreements. Miss Rhodes filed a notice within 48 hours. He had to reverse the locks by July, humiliated. Tom reported him spending long hours alone on the dock, staring out at the water, sometimes muttering to himself. Once he kicked over a cooler and nearly fell into the lake. His desperation had shifted from financial to psychological. Carla, on the other hand, grew stronger. By late July, she'd quietly started forwarding me photocopies of financial mail that came to their house. Credit card statements, overdue notices, one particularly telling envelope from Hera's VIP services. She didn't confront him directly. She fed the slow burn. August 3rd marked another critical development. Miss Rhodes received notification that the insurance underwriters were escalating the review to a formal fraud inquiry due to material inconsistencies. That was the legal equivalent of a lip match. Gavin didn't know it yet. But his situation was no longer just about me and him. It was now institutional. September came with thick fog over the lake. One morning I found Gavin at the marina unexpectedly. He was unlocking his truck when he spotted me. For a second there was something raw in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or realization. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" he said, voice low and sharp. "No," I replied calmly. "I suppose I'm just patient." He sneered and drove off, tires spitting gravel. By October, his financial options had collapsed. Loans denied, transfers blocked, insurance under review, estate frozen, surveillance records growing. Every avenue he'd once used to maneuver was now either legally sealed or under someone else's microscope. And through it all, I remained methodical, quiet, unshakable. The slow burn was working, and Gavin for the first time knew it. Early 2022, New Orleans and Baton Rouge, Louisiana. By the start of 2022, the quiet storm I'd built over nearly 3 years had turned into a legal and financial riptide. Gavin didn't know it yet, but every move he made was now being funneled toward one inevitable place, a courtroom. January in New Orleans carries a strange stillness. The tourists are mostly gone after the holidays. The lake lies flat under gray skies, and the city exhales before Mardi Gras kicks up again. I spent most mornings walking the levee before sunrise, letting the cold air clear my head. I wasn't planning new moves anymore. The plan was already in motion. My job now was to maintain pressure and wait. The first crack of the new year came January 17th. Gavin attempted to refinance his personal property share of the estate through a secondary lender in Baton Rouge. The request triggered an automatic legal flag from the standing injunction Miss Rhodes had secured the year before. The lender contacted the estate's legal representatives for verification. 2 days later, Gavin received formal notice that the request was denied and reported. Tom was parked 2 blocks from Gavin's set's house. The morning that letter arrived, he recorded Gavin pacing in his driveway, phone glued to his ear, voice sharp. "This setter blocking everything. I can set a bitch even breathe without him knowing." He wasn't set wrong. February brought Mardi Gras parades, brass bands, and beads, while Gavin Sipp's world quietly narrowed. The insurance fraud inquiry, launched the previous August, reached its preliminary conclusion. Material misrepresentation suspected. Further investigation warranted. Miss Rhodes received the notice on February 12th. We met the next morning at her office. She laid the letter on the desk like a chess piece placed precisely. "This," she said, tapping it once, "changes everything. If the insurers escalate this to a full fraud claim, it becomes both a financial and criminal matter. He can hide from this anymore." I nodded slowly. "So what sips next?" "We keep steady. Court calendar is our friend now. If he moves, he makes noise. If he freezes, the institutions move without us. Either way, the net tightens. March arrived, warm and wet. Carla and I met at a cafe near City Park, as we did monthly. She slid a thick envelope across the table. More of Gavin's financial mail. Overdue notices, a rejected loan application, and one especially telling letter from Jefferson Parish Finance Cooperative, reminding him of a default clause on a credit line he'd opened 2 years earlier. Carla whispered, "He's starting to panic at home. He doesn't sleep, keeps muttering about lawyers. The kids are noticing." The slow burn of 2021 was giving way to outright constriction. Tom's surveillance became surgical. By April, he wasn't trailing Gavin everywhere anymore. He didn't need to. Instead, he focused on key pressure points. The marina, Harrah's, and a small law office in Baton Rouge. Gavin started visiting regularly. On April 6th, Tom caught Gavin leaving that office with a manila folder under his arm, visibly agitated. Audio picked up him muttering, "He thinks he's got me cornered. I said'll show him." I didn't respond emotionally to that. Emotion was for amateurs. Instead, I called Miss Rhodes. "Pull any new filings in Baton Rouge related to Gavin's LLC." I told her. 3 days later, she called back. "He tried to set up a new holding company under a proxy. Its setup's already flagged. They once said it let it through while the injunction stands." Gavin was thrashing in the net, and every move only tangled him further. May brought heat early. The lake smelled of salt and wet wood. On May 11th, Gavin made an unannounced visit to the marina. Theo, the same dockhand from 2019, called me later that day. "Hey, Mr. Winston," he said cautiously. "Gavin was down here earlier, looked pissed, kept asking weird questions about the insurance on the boats. Something's up." I thanked him, logged the call, and notified Tom. Tom was there the next morning. He watched Gavin pace the docks alone for 45 minutes, muttering to himself, staring at the water. When he finally left, Tom followed him to Harrah's. Same pattern, desperation on a loop. Meanwhile, Miss Rhodes moved the legal chessboard forward. On June 2nd, she filed the preliminary court date petition. The petition requested a formal hearing to address the attempted refinancing violations, ongoing insurance fraud investigation status, potential estate mismanagement. The court accepted. Hearing scheduled October 16th, 2023. It was months away, but for me that date might as well have been engraved in steel. The endgame had a calendar now. Summer arrived heavy and bright. June storms rolled through Louisiana, rattling windows and flooding streets. But inside Gavin's world, the floodwaters were legal, not weather. Carla confided more frequently as the months wore on. In July, she whispered over the phone, "He's checking the locks twice a night. Keeps saying people are watching him." I think he knows something coming. Even if he doesn't understand what. He was right. He just didn't understand that the people watching weren't shadows. They were lawyers, investigators, and institutions he'd underestimated. By August, Tom Sip's updates became almost clinical. August 3rd, Gavin visited Harrah's twice in one day. August 14th, he tried to contact a property lawyer in Baton Rouge to explore alternative title transfers. August 21st, surveillance recorded him sitting alone at the marina dock at 2:14 a.m., staring out at the water. Gavin wasn't strategizing anymore. He was unraveling publicly. I'd walk past him sometimes at family events, birthdays, Carla's Sunday dinners, and he'd give me this look, a mixture of hatred and fear. The kind of look cornered men give when they've run out of exits. And through it all, I stayed patient. Steady. The net wasn't closing because of sudden moves. It was closing because of years of quiet, deliberate preparation. By September, everything was aligned. Legal injunctions in place. Insurance fraud investigation escalating. Financial avenues blocked. Surveillance evidence airtight. Court date set. I remember standing on the levee one late evening, cool wind coming off the lake, lights flickering on the water. I thought about that shove in 2019, the splash, the smirk, and realized how far we'd come. The net had tightened, and Gavin was exactly where he'd put himself trapped. October 16th, 2023, Baton Rouge Parish Courthouse, Louisiana. Some mornings feel like turning points long before the sun is fully up. The air on October 16th carried that weight, humid, heavy, electric. It wasn't just another legal date on the calendar. It was the day 3.5 years of betrayal, strategy, and patience finally converged in one courtroom. I woke before dawn. The house was silent, except for the distant creak of the old dock outside. I'd laid out my clothes the night before, charcoal suit, polished shoes, nothing flashy. In court, presentation is strategy too. Calm, controlled, no theatrics. As I drove toward Baton Rouge, mist rose off Lake Pontchartrain like smoke from an old wound. The highway was slick from overnight rain, and my hands rested steady on the wheel. I wasn't nervous, I was focused. This wasn't improvisation, it was execution. The Baton Rouge Parish Courthouse stood under a gray sky, its stone facade damp and streaked from decades of storms. Reporters weren't there, this wasn't a sensational case. But inside those walls, the culmination of Gavin's deceit was about to unravel publicly. Courtroom 3B was cold, with polished wood benches and that faint scent of old paper and floor polish. The hum of whispered conversations filled the air. I sat at the petitioner's table beside Miss Rhodes, who wore her usual calm like armor. Across the room, Gavin sat with his lawyer, a younger man in an ill-fitting suit, looking like someone who'd walked into a trap but couldn't quite admit it yet. He glanced at me once. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw clenched tight. There was no bravado left, just the faint tremor of a man who'd run out of places to hide. The bailiff called the court to order at 9 a.m. sharp. Judge Hernandez, a stern woman in her late 50s, with an impeccable reputation for cutting through nonsense, took her seat. Her gavel tapped once, crisp as a rifle shot. Case number 23471B, Estate Audit Injunction and Associated Motions. Winston McAllister, petitioner. Gavin Dwyer, respondent. That sound, the gavel, the roll call, the echo, felt like the moment a SEAL operation officially begins. No more hypotheticals, no more preparation, just action. Miss Rhodes opened with quiet precision. She walked the judge through the timeline with the confidence of someone who already won the chess match months ago. July 2019, suspicious boating incident. August 2019, insurance policy increase of $50,000, naming Gavin secondary beneficiary. 2019-2020, evidence of mounting gambling debts, $42,700 documented, suspicious financial activity. Spring 2020 onward, surveillance photographs at Harrah's Casino, notarized letters and audits triggering financial maneuvering. 2021, injunction filings, insurance fraud investigation launched. 2022, attempted refinancing violations, continued asset manipulation. 2023, court petition to consolidate findings. Every statement was accompanied by documents entered into evidence, each one numbered, logged, and placed neatly on the table. The $2,800 marine receipt. The insurance documents dated August 11th, 2019. Photos from Harrah Sips. The recorded bar conversation about moving titles. Blocked transfer notices. Insurance fraud inquiry letters. The preliminary injunction. All of it. Laid out like the trail of breadcrumbs Gavin had never realized he was leaving. When Miss Rhodes finished, the courtroom was silent. Even Gavin's lawyer looked uneasy. Then it was their turn. Gavin's defense hinged on two things: character deflection and plausible deniability. His lawyer tried to argue that the financial transfers were misunderstood business ventures, that the insurance increase was routine estate planning, and that Gavin's gambling debts were irrelevant to inheritance disputes. Judge Hernandez's eyebrows didn't move once during that speech. Then came Gavin Sett's testimony. He took the stand reluctantly, tugging at his cuffs like a man wishing for another exit. His voice wavered on the opening oath. His lawyer guided him with softballs at first. "Mr. Dwyer, would you say your relationship with your brother-in-law has been cordial?" Gavin forced a smile. "Mostly, yes." "Did you ever intend to harm Mr. McAllister financially?" No, never. But under cross-examination, Miss Rhodes dismantled him piece by piece. She didn't raise her voice once. She didn't need to. Mr. Dwyer, she began calmly, is this your signature on the August 11th, 2019 insurance amendment? Yes. And at that time you were aware of your $42,700 gambling debt, correct? His throat bobbed. Yes. Is this you in the photograph taken April 4th, 2020 at Harrisip's Casino? Yes. And in this recording you are heard saying, and I quote, "Titty before lawyers freeze it all," Winston Ness sniffing around. "Das ist your voice." Silence. "Mr. Dwyer?" "Yes." Each answer echoed in the wood-paneled courtroom like the creak of tightening rope. Then Miss Rhodes delivered the quiet blade. "You attempted to refinance your portion of the estate in January 2022 despite a standing injunction. Is that correct?" Gavin shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't set no. The bank records show you were notified of the injunction on January 22nd, 2021. Were you aware of this at the time of your refinancing attempt?" "Yes." "No theatrics, just facts. Brick by brick." Then it was Carla Sepp's turn. She stepped up nervously but stood firm. She testified about the late-night phone calls, the financial mail, Gavin's unraveling at home, and his proposal to buy me out in September 2020. Her voice broke once when she said, "I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence didn't leave me any choice." Gavin wouldn't look at her. The final piece came when Tom presented his surveillance logs, clean, legal, precise. Photos, dates, locations, audio transcripts. Judge Hernandez asked him 2 questions. Were all these recordings made in public spaces? "Yes, Your Honor." "Were they altered in any way?" "No, Your Honor." The gavel tapped once. Admitted. The defense had nothing left but bluster. Gavin's lawyer sputtered about family misunderstandings, but the damage was done. After closing statements, the judge called a short recess. I stepped outside onto the courthouse steps, breathing the humid October air. Carla stood beside me, silent. Neither of us needed to speak. We both knew which way this was going. 35 minutes later, everyone reconvened. Judge Hernandez didn't waste time. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds in favor of the petitioner, Mr. McAllister. The injunction remains in effect. Respondents' actions constitute clear attempts at financial manipulation and fraudulent behavior concerning the estate. All estate assets will remain frozen pending further criminal investigation by relevant authorities. Additionally, restitution and legal costs are to be pursued. Her gavel came down like thunder. Gavin's shoulders collapsed inward. The man who'd smirked as I fell into the lake in 2019 now looked like a soaked paper bag left in the rain. The net had fully closed. Publicly, legally, permanently. As we exited the courtroom, reporters were still absent. There was no dramatic press swarm, just humid Louisiana air, courthouse stone, and the quiet knowledge that justice had finally caught up. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just exhaled. 3.5 years. Receipt by receipt. Lie by lie. All of it led here. Late 2023. Lake Pontchartrain, Louisiana. The courthouse was behind me. The judgment had been handed down. The legal storm that had consumed more than 4 years of my life was finally quiet. But silence, I discovered, isn't the same as peace. The morning after the ruling, I drove to the lake before sunrise. It was mid-November, cool but not yet cold, the kind of morning where the mist clings low to the water and the world feels suspended between night and day. The dock creaked under my boots. That sound used to trigger memories of betrayal, the splash, the smirk, the panic in cold water. But that morning it sounded different. Solid, familiar. Like it belonged to me again. I brought coffee in a thermos, poured it into the same dented steel mug I'd carried on deployments years ago. The steam curled upward in the chilly air, catching the first faint streaks of dawn. The estate was still frozen legally, but practically it was mine now. The court had sided with me on every motion. Gavin was under investigation for insurance fraud and financial misrepresentation. His access to estate accounts was severed. His lawyer had already filed withdrawal notices. He wasn't just cornered anymore. He was contained. Carla joined me a few minutes later. She wore a wool shawl, her hair pulled back against the wind. For a moment we stood side by side in silence, watching pelicans glide low across the water. "He's staying with his cousin in Baton Rouge," she said quietly. I nodded. I already knew. Tom had confirmed it the night before. Gavin had left New Orleans less than 6 hours after the ruling, slipping away before the reality of his defeat could settle around him. "He once said talk to me," Carla added. "Once said talk to the kids, either." And I exhaled slowly. "That's not your fault." She looked at me then, eyes tired but clear. "I believed him for too long." "You trusted your husband," I said. "That's not a crime." "It almost cost us everything," she whispered. We stayed out there for nearly an hour, not filling the silence, just letting it breathe. There was nothing left to plan, no more strategies to refine. The battle had been fought. The judgment delivered. The echoes were fading now, leaving space for something else, something quieter. Over the next few weeks, the estate underwent its final legal stabilization. Miss Rhodes worked with auditors to finalize the freeze-to-transfer timeline. The insurance fraud investigation moved to the state level, and though criminal charges were still pending, Gavin's financial collapse was already public record. He owed restitution. He faced legal costs. His inheritance share was effectively neutralized. For someone like Gavin, whose entire scheme was built on desperation and bravado, public exposure was the one consequence he could never outmaneuver. The marina workers started treating me differently too. Not dramatically, no one in New Orleans ever makes a spectacle out of quiet revelations, but with subtle nods, longer eye contact, that unspoken understanding people share when truth finally surfaces. Theo, the dockhand from that first morning back in 2019, handed me my keys one evening in late November and said, "Guess he picked the wrong guy to mess with, huh?" I smiled faintly. Something like that. Life didn't return to what it was before. It couldn't. Betrayal leaves fingerprints on the soul, but it did settle into a new shape, one where I wasn't constantly scanning the horizon for Gavin's next move. I replaced the locks on the boathouse in early December, legally this time with Carla's blessing and the court's documentation in place. I logged the new keys, updated the estate records, and filed copies with Miss Rhodes's office. No loose ends, not anymore. In quiet moments, usually early mornings like this one, I sit at the end of the dock with that steel mug, watching the mist rise off the water. I think about everything that had happened. The shove, the voicemail, the receipts, the surveillance, the courtroom. Every step had felt deliberate at the time, but now, looking back, it resembled a mosaic. Each piece alone might have looked random, but together they formed a clear picture of betrayal, strategy, and consequence. Gavin hadn't just underestimated me. He'd underestimated time. Time has a way of revealing truth, piece by piece, if you're patient enough to watch. And I been patient. Carla eventually found her own rhythm again. She threw herself into her work at the clinic, started therapy with the kids, and slowly the haunted look she'd carried for months began to fade. She never tried to defend Gavin's actions after the ruling. She didn't have to. The evidence had spoken louder than any family loyalty could. Tom wrapped up his part too. In early December, we met at the diner one last time. Same corner booth where we'd started in 2020. He slid my folder back across the table. "All copies, originals are still in the vault." "Keep them," I said. "Case isn't set closed yet." He nodded. "But your part is." He was right. By late December, the estate's legal status was stable. The investigation's ongoing but predictable, and my ledger, my meticulously kept handwritten ledger, was complete. I tucked it into a fireproof safe at home. Not out of paranoia anymore, out of closure. One foggy morning, just before Christmas, I whispered something to the lake as I locked up the boathouse for the night. "You didn't lose me, Gavin. You gave me away." The water didn't answer, but it didn't need to. I already knew. Justice hadn't been loud. It had been patient, methodical, precise. And it had finally arrived. Early 2024, New Orleans, Louisiana. Justice doesn't end with the gavel. It lingers, it ripples outward. And by early 2024, those ripples were finally reaching distant shores I hadn't anticipated. January in New Orleans has a strange duality. The city wakes slowly after the holidays. Humidity still clings to the air, and the lake grows quiet before the Mardi Gras tourists flood back in. But beneath that quiet, conversations were shifting. Gavin's fall had stopped being just a family issue. It was becoming a community story, not in the sensational, headline-grabbing way, but in the quieter rhythm of small-town Louisiana gossip. At the marina, whispers traveled faster than the wind. "Did you hear about the Dwyer mess? They froze the estate, I heard." Winston played it smart. Real smart. I wasn't part of these conversations directly, but I caught fragments when I walked down the docks or stopped for supplies. Eyes lingered a little longer. People nodded silently when I passed. Not congratulatory, more like respectful acknowledgement. The story of Gavin's greed and my patience had become a kind of cautionary tale. Don't underestimate quiet men who keep receipts. Carla felt the ripples too. By February, she'd started attending church again regularly with the kids. At first, some parishioners avoided her. Gavin's betrayal had been a stain on the family's name, and people didn't know how to separate her from him. But slowly, as the facts of the case circulated through public filings, the insurance fraud inquiry updates, and the court record, the tone shifted. She wasn't the wife of the man who tried to game the inheritance anymore. She was the sister who stood with her brother when the truth surfaced. She told me one Sunday afternoon, as we sat outside Café du Monde drinking café au lait and watching tourists pile beignets with too much powdered sugar, "People don't set look at me the same way anymore. It's set as strange, like they finally believe me." "They don't to believe you," I said quietly. "They believe the evidence, and that sep's good. It means you don't have to defend yourself anymore." She smiled faintly. "You always were the calm one." It wasn't set calm, it was calculated endurance. Meanwhile, Gavin's situation was deteriorating faster than even I had expected. By March 2024, the state-level insurance fraud investigation had formally opened a criminal case. Court filings became public record, and creditors started circling like gulls over a shrimp boat. One of Tom Sipp's contacts in Baton Rouge sent me a public docket notice. State of Louisiana v. Gavin Dwyer, case number 24 FR 221. Charges: insurance fraud, attempted fraudulent conveyance, financial misrepresentation. It wasn't my doing anymore. It was out of my hands, exactly where I wanted it. Institutions were moving on their own inertia now. Gavin had spent years underestimating how slowly justice can move, until suddenly it doesn't. Tom and I met at the diner again in mid-March. The air was damp, the formica table sticky as always. He pushed the docket printout toward me. "He's done," Tom said simply. "I know. You ever think he thought USAP'd actually go this far?" I took a slow sip of coffee. "No, and that sip's exactly why I won." The ripples reached the extended family too. Cousins who had stayed quiet during the legal storm began reaching out again. Some apologized for doubting me. Others were just curious, fishing for details they hadn't bothered to ask when it mattered. I wasn't bitter, just selective. Trust, once broken, isn't rebuilt with apologies. It's rebuilt with time and proof. I answered politely but kept my distance. Spring crept into the city with warm breezes and azaleas blooming along Magazine Street. The lake was calmer than it had been in years. I spent more mornings fishing again, this time alone but not lonely. There's a difference between isolation and solitude. Isolation is forced on you. Solitude is something you claim back. I reclaimed mine. In April, Carla invited me to her oldest daughter's school play, a local production of The Music Man. It was the first family event in years where I wasn't scanning rooms for Gavin's presence or hidden agendas. The kids ran up to hug me when I arrived, their laughter echoing in the auditorium. Carla caught my eye from across the room. There was gratitude in her smile, but also something deeper, relief. She was finally building a life not defined by her husband's shadow. Later that month, we had a quiet dinner at her house. It wasn't a holiday, no special occasion, just gumbo, cornbread, and laughter. Something ordinary, something real. As the night wore on, she asked, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't found that receipt?" I leaned back, considering the question. All the time that piece of paper was the first domino. Without it, maybe I have confronted him emotionally instead of strategically, and he might have buried the evidence before anyone noticed. She shuddered. Scary thought. "Yeah," I said softly. "But that's why you collect facts, not feelings." The conversation lingered in my mind for days afterward. It wasn't just a story about Gavin anymore. It was about what betrayal does to families, how it fractures them, and how, if you're careful, you can rebuild the parts worth saving. By May 2024, the estate had settled into its new rhythm. Legal oversight remained, but it was predictable. Miss Rhodes managed the administrative end efficiently. Tom had moved on to other clients. Carla and I talked often, but not about Gavin anymore. That chapter was closing, page by page. The ripples were still spreading, but now they carried stability, not shock. Summer 2024, Lake Pontchartrain, Louisiana. Some stories don't end with fireworks. They end quietly, like the tide receding after a storm. By the summer of 2024, that's exactly what my life felt like. The calm after a long, deliberate reckoning. June mornings at Lake Pontchartrain have a particular kind of light. The sun rises slow and gold, scattering across the water in shimmering paths that look almost deliberate, like they're pointing somewhere. That morning, I followed one of those paths as I walked down the dock, thermos in hand, listening to the soft knock of the boats against their moorings. The estate had finally stabilized legally. The fraud case against Gavin was underway at the state level, but my role in it was essentially over. I'd given my testimony, submitted every piece of evidence I'd collected, and tied up every loose end. My ledger was closed. It had taken 5 years from the day I hit the water to this quiet sunrise, but the circle had finally closed. I sat at the end of the dock, the wood warm beneath me, and thought about everything that had led here: the shove, the insurance scam, the receipts, the surveillance, the courtroom, the ripples. What struck me most wasn't the betrayal anymore. It was the patience. Every victory had come slowly, like heat seeping through iron, not from rage but from discipline. Gavinet's legal fate was no longer a mystery. In early June, Miss Rhodes forwarded me the official notice. State of Louisiana Vev, Gavin Dwyer. Trial scheduled September 9th, 2024. Charges: insurance fraud, attempted fraudulent conveyance, financial misrepresentation. Maximum penalties: restitution, fines, possible incarceration. I didn't feel joy reading it. I didn't even feel relief. I just nodded once and filed it away. Gavin's path was set now. Not by me, but by his own actions. Carla and I had dinner the night before that dock morning. A simple family cookout. Kids running in the yard. Citronella candles flickering against the early summer dusk. She looked lighter than she had in years. The tension that used to hang in her house like humidity was gone. "He asked for a plea deal," she said quietly after the kids went to bed. "I know," I replied. "He sets scared." "He should be." She sighed, staring out toward the darkened yard. "I don't hate him, Winston, but I don't forgive him either. Does that make sense?" "It makes perfect sense," I said. "Some wounds don't heal into what they were before. They just become scars. And scars aren't weakness. They proof you survived." She nodded slowly. I think I seemed finally ready to move on. I believed her. And for the first time I felt that I was too. July brought warmth and tourists back to the lake. Life settled into rhythms that felt familiar but evolved. I started fixing up the boathouse again, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to. New locks, fresh paint, clean tools hung precisely on the wall. One afternoon, Theo stopped by. "She's looking good," he said, nodding toward the boat. "Yeah," I replied with a faint smile. "She deserves a proper future." "So do you," he said. His words lingered longer than I expected. The community's memory of Gavin's schemes faded quicker than I thought it would. By August, the gossip had quieted. People moved on, as they always do. The story became just another cautionary tale told at marina bars after a few drinks. Remember that guy who tried to screw over his brother-in-law and got buried by paperwork? I didn't correct them. The details didn't matter anymore. The lesson did. One night in late August, I took the boat out alone. The water was calm, the sky streaked with purple and orange. I anchored near the same spot where Gavin had pushed me 5 years earlier. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the water slap against the hull, feeling the night settle around me. The ghosts of that moment were still there, but they'd changed. They didn't haunt me anymore. They watched quietly like old soldiers at parade rest. I thought about my late wife then, about what she would have said if she'd seen all this unfold. She'd always told me, "You fight your battles with precision, not noise." I hadn't understood the weight of that until this entire ordeal. Precision had won the war. Not rage, not vengeance in the cinematic sense. Precision, patience, documentation. I picked up the thermos and raised it slightly toward the dark horizon. "We did it," I whispered. The lake stayed silent, but I could almost feel her presence in the warm night air. Back on shore, I locked the boathouse and paused at the door. I thought about Gavin's smirk over the water, the insurance papers, the courtroom gavel, and finally this still night. The story didn't end with him in handcuffs or me in some grand victory pose. It ended with me standing here alive, whole, calm, because I refused to let betrayal dictate the ending. As I walked back toward the house, I realized something simple but profound. Revenge hadn't been about crushing him. It had been about reclaiming myself, my legacy, my home, my peace. Betrayal had started this story, but patience had ended it.